Yes, without relinquishing the floor, I will yield to a question from the senator from Texas.
I would ask the senator his reactions as to the possible justifications for the administration's repeated reluctance to answer what should be a very straightforward question. I find myself genuinely puzzled that both Mr. Brennan and Attorney General Holder, when asked whether the United States government may kill a United States citizen on U.S. soil with a drone strike, absent an imminent threat of harm to life or grievous bodily injury, I find it quite puzzling that both of them did not simply respond, "Of course not. Of course we can't. We never have in the history of this country, and we never will. The Constitution forbids it." In my understanding of the Constitution, that was not a difficult question that you asked, and I find it quite remarkable that they treated it as a difficult question. And to be clear, there is no dispute, or at least no serious dispute, that if an individual poses an imminent threat of harm, if an individual is robbing a bank, there's no dispute that law enforcement, a SWAT team, can use deadly force to prevent the imminent threat to life or limb. What this issue is about is an individual who is not posing an imminent threat, a U.S. citizen on U.S. soil, and the administration's continued reluctance to say the Constitution forbids killing that U.S. citizen without due process of law. So what I want to ask you about is efficacy. Let us take a hypothetical individual whom the U.S. government believes to be a terrorist, who is sitting at a cafe enjoying a cup of coffee, not posing an imminent threat to anybody. And the question I would ask about efficacy, and if I might, I'd like to ask a couple of questions. Number one, if it turns out the intelligence is incorrect, that this individual the U.S. government suspects of being a terrorist is not in fact a terrorist, that they have the wrong guy, and if a drone strike is used and that individual is killed, is there any effective remedy to correct that tragic mistake?
Mr. President, I think the question is well put, and the first aspect of the question is, what is the president thinking? Why would the president not respond to us? Why would the president not answer a pretty easy question and say that non-combatants in the United States won't be killed with drones? I think the reason is complicated, and it's conjecture because I can't get in his mind, but I would say it's sort of a contagion or an infection that affects Republicans and Democrats when they get into the White House. They see the power that the presidency has. It's enormous. They see themselves as good people, and they say, I can't give up any power because I'm going to do good with that power. The problem they don't see is that the power itself is intoxicating, and that the power someday may be in the hands of someone else who's less inclined to use it in a good way. And I think that's why the power grows and grows and grows, because everybody believes themselves to be doing the right thing. With regard to exactly what would happen in the situation when there's not an imminent threat, it boggles the mind that we can't answer that question. And I don't have a good understanding as to why exactly that we can't get a response. And I would yield for a response from the senator from Texas.
If I could ask a second question. In the instance where the intelligence was wrong and a U.S. citizen was killed by his or her government without due process of law, there obviously would be no remedy. But I would ask you about the alternate scenario. If it were the case that this individual was in fact a terrorist, was involved in a plot to threaten the lives, threaten the safety of other Americans, if this U.S. citizen sitting at a cafe is killed with a drone strike, focusing on efficacy, once he is killed, am I correct that you can't interrogate him further? You can't find out who else was in the terrorist plot with him. You can't find out what methods he had put in place. You can't find out if there is an imminent threat planned that he may know of But if a drone from the sky simply kills him, that knowledge perishes with him at that cafe, and so undermines the legitimate efforts of our government to protect the safety and security of all Americans.
Mr. President, I think it's an excellent question and really kind of gets to the root of the whole problem we're talking about here, because we're talking about people that may not all be good people. They may be bad people, and they may be plotting to do something bad to America, and they may be in a cafe. So there may be all kinds of reasons to arrest them, punish them, but there may be all kinds of reasons to try to get more information from them. Particularly if they're not involved in combat, it's hard to imagine why you would want to kill them. If they're not involved in combat, why not capture them and try to get some useful information out of them? And so it is a little bit difficult to understand why the president wouldn't say what is obvious. Why would we want to kill non-combatants in America? But the reason we keep asking the question is, of the drone strikes overseas, which we're not privy to all the details because some of it's classified, but the details that have been in the press is that a lot of these people being killed overseas are not in combat. So the real question is, if you're going to take this drone strike overseas and it has no geographic limitations, you're bringing it home to America, does the president not think it's incumbent upon him to say, well, yeah, we're bringing it home, but we're not going to kill non-combatants? What an important question. I think you phrased it appropriately, and I would anticipate or respect any other response that you would like to give.
One final question for the senator from Kentucky. I am aware that the senator from Kentucky is originally from the great state of Texas. And as the senator is no doubt aware, today is the 177th anniversary of the fall of the Alamo. 182 men were stationed at the Alamo, and after 13 days of a bitter siege, fighting an army of thousands, those patriots gave their lives for freedom. They put everything on the line to stand against tyranny and to stand for the fundamental right of every man and woman to breathe freely, to control our own lives, our own autonomy, to make decisions about what our future would be. And if I may presume to speak on behalf of 26 million Texans, I will say that I have no doubt that Texans are proud to see the distinguished senator from Kentucky as a native-born Texan fighting so valiantly for liberty, serving as such a clarion voice for liberty at a time when sometimes liberty has few champions. And indeed, I would suggest if those brave patriots of the Alamo were here, that William Barrett Travis and Davy Crockett and Jim Bowie and each of the others who gave their lives for freedom would be standing side by side with you and would be proud to call you brother.
Mr. President, I'd like to say that I appreciate the remarks of the senator from Texas, and if the filibuster goes on long enough, we would like to hear a recitation of William Barrett Travis's last words at the Alamo. We had to memorize that as a kid, and I'm afraid my memory's gone a little dusty, but you are younger and may still remember that for us. The issue at hand really is an issue that goes beyond party politics. It goes beyond nominations. It goes beyond, you know, the president's a Democrat, I'm a Republican. I've voted for 3 of the president's nominations, much to the chagrin and much to the criticism of some on my side. But I've done so because I think the president does get some prerogative. That's just my personal viewpoint on choosing political appointees. Now, this is a political appointee, but I don't consider this debate to be about the appointee. I think this debate is more about a constitutional issue, and I think it rises to a level above the individual, and it's something that we need to draw attention to. We need to have a good, healthy discussion in our country, and I don't think it has to be a bitter partisan battle. I've met the president personally. I've flown on Air Force One with him. I respect him. I respect the office. And I think he and I could have a reasonable conversation on this. In fact, I think if he were here today, he might actually agree with much of what I'm saying. what I'm disappointed in, and I don't know if it's the muddle of a large government and not getting a message for it, but what I'm disappointed in is that it's been so hard to get him to agree with what I think he should already and probably already agrees with. But when we're talking about doing something so different, when we're talking about changing the way that we adjudicate guilt, changing the way we decide someone's life or death, it's too important just to say, oh, Mr. President, go ahead and do it, and as long as you tell me you have no intent of breaking the law or no intent of killing Americans, that's enough. It just simply isn't enough. You know, it's not enough to say, I haven't done it yet, I don't intend to kill anybody, but I might. And he came up with some circumstances where he might use the drone strikes in America. And then in Senator Cruz's cross-examination in the committee, we've gotten them to admit, under duress, I think, but to admit that they're not talking about people in a cafe. And some might say, well, he's never mentioned people in a cafe. The reason it comes up of people not involved in combat is that a lot of the people who have been the victims of these or have been killed by these drone strikes have not been involved in combat when they've been killed. They've been riding in cars, walking down the street, traveling in caravans. And I'm not saying they're good people. I'm just saying the standard for who we kill overseas, we have to ask the question, and I don't think we're doing our job if we don't ask the president, are you going to use the same criteria for how you kill people overseas? Is that the same criteria here? And it shouldn't be, well, I'll tell you later. It shouldn't be, I don't intend to do it, and I probably won't, but I might. I mean, that's just not enough. I mean, we are talking about basic protections that we fought a revolution over, and really, in a way, when I see the wars that we've gone to, and not every war has been perfectly justified or that we should do it, but the thing is, when our soldiers fight, I see them as fighting for the Bill of Rights, and I think they see that too. No matter where they are around the world, I see them fighting for the Bill of Rights in our Constitution. But if we're giving that up, if we're not going to adhere to the Fifth Amendment, I find that, you know, it takes the wind out of the sails, you know, the wind out of the sails. And can you imagine being a soldier in Afghanistan or Iraq or in far-flung places around the world, and you're told, well, you were fighting for the Bill of Rights minus the Fifth Amendment. Or when we say we're going to indefinitely detain people, we're going to fight for the Bill of Rights minus the Sixth Amendment. You know, it is pretty important. These things are what we're fighting for, so we really should at least have a robust debate over, you know, the magnitude of these changes, over how these will be set up, over exactly what will happen, how this process is going to work. And just saying I'm not intending to do so is not enough. Mr. President, I'd like to, without yielding the floor, allow a question from the senator from Texas.
If the senator from Kentucky would allow this question, I would like to respond to his very gracious invitation and ask if the following letter gives the senator from Kentucky encouragement and sustenance as he stands and fights for liberty. This letter was written February 24th, 1836, and it begins as follows: to the people of Texas and all Americans in the world, I am besieged by 1,000 or more. I have sustained a continual bombardment and cannonade for 24 hours and have not lost a man. The enemy has demanded a surrender at discretion. Otherwise, the garrison are to be put to the sword if the fort is taken. I have answered the demand with a cannon shot, and our flag still waves proudly from the walls. I shall never surrender or retreat. Then I call on you in the name of liberty, of patriotism, and of everything dear to the American character, to come to our aid with all dispatch. If this call is neglected, I am determined to sustain myself as long as possible and die like a soldier who never forgets what is due to his own honor and that of his country. Victory or death. Signed, William Barrett Travis. My question is, does that glorious letter give you an encouragement and sustenance on this 177th anniversary of the Alamo?
Well, Mr. President, I think, what Travis's letter at the Alamo talks about is that there are things bigger than the individual. At the time he wrote that, I don't think they had much hope of surviving, and he died at the Alamo, as well as with other volunteers, some from my state of Kentucky. But there was an issue bigger to them at the time that they saw as bigger than the issue of the individual. And I think that's what this debate is about. This isn't really about the person of John Brennan. This really isn't about the person of Barack Obama. This is about the body of the Constitution. It's about our respect for it. And it's about whether or not we will hold these principles so dear and we will hold these principles so high that we're willing to try to enjoin a debate, to try to get both sides to talk about this, and to try to admit, because we don't want people to be killed who are innocent in America. We want to have the process that has protected our freedoms for a couple hundred years now to remain in place, and we're unwilling to diminish that simply because of fear. FDR said, it's nothing to fear but fear itself. I think we should also say it's not that we should let fear be so great that we allow the loss of our freedoms. And I think that's where we are, that sometimes, terrorists are everywhere and they're trying to attack us. Well, we need to remember that it's our freedom that's precious, and we need to try to do everything we can to uphold that.